Light the candle and put it under a bushel. Matthew 5:14 and following, you're the light of the world, let your light so shine before men. Nobody lights a candle and puts it under a bushel, but on a candlestick, and it gives light to all that are in the house. Question, who lights the light in your house? Who lights the fire in the home? Biblically speaking, we can go back to the book of Genesis and work our way forward in looking at examples of those who led their homes or those who failed. Adam, one that failed at the first interaction that's really recorded. Or we can look at Noah, one that led his home despite an ungodly world around him. We can look at the life of individuals like Abraham. We can look at the ups and downs of Isaac and Jacob. We can look at the life of Moses. But think for a moment about one. We don't often think of him as a husband, and we don't frequently consider him in the role of father. Yet he made a statement that is definitive of what it means to lead a home. Joshua 24:15. Choose you this day whom you'll serve. Whether the gods your father served on the other side of the flood, the river in their history, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you now dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Joshua made a statement that is a keynote and a beacon for what it means to lead the home. That being said, it's important that we understand when we talk about leading the home, we're not just talking about what it means to tell them to read the Bible and pray. That's going to be part of it. For our study this evening, Joshua was a very practical individual, and we want to draw 10 practical ideas from his life that can be applied to the idea of, as for me and my house will serve the Lord. 10 musts for leading a home. Maybe you're the husband, maybe you're the wife. Maybe you are a parent. Maybe you're one of the children in the home. Maybe your home is composed of only you. Whatever the case and whomever you are, whether you are the head of your home or not, these things are important. Because there's a chance that one day you may be. There's a chance that one day you may be because the person who's now head of your house may not be there. There's a chance that one day you may be because you're a young person up and coming and you'll be married. You'll be a husband. Whatever the case, as we work through 10 musts for leading a home, we want to make sure that we appreciate, encourage, and exhort the very traits that Joshua exemplified. As we move through these, we want to identify a key word. We'll use an idiomatic phrase to describe each one, and then we'll give a bit of an explanation. But 10 musts for leading a godly home. Number one, first. Makes sense, right? First will be first. First things first. What do we mean by putting first things first? When it comes to leading the home, it's about prioritizing relationships. This is a challenge. Having counseled dozens of couples and listened to, always asking the question, who is the model of the husband you want to be and why? 90% of the time, the male will reply, so-and-so. Maybe it was dad, maybe it was uncle, maybe it was a member of the church. But the individual that he has in mind, who he wants to emulate as a husband, the positive role model of what it means to be a husband, one of the motives behind following that individual's example is going to be because he was a provider. That's one of the key ideas in the mind of the husband. That's a high priority. He wants to be a provider. He's afraid that he is going to fail on his responsibility. And in that fear, sometimes carts can get in front of horses and priorities can get misconstrued. It's going to be important to prioritize relationships. What do we mean by that? Well, first and foremost, Him. And by Him we mean God. Jesus would say, Matthew 10:37, whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. He that loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. But in Luke 14:26, He put it this way. If any man come after me and hate not father, mother, wife, children, brother, sister, his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. The point? If I'm going to follow Him, He's first. He's the all. Unless God comes first, the home will never meet the potential of what it could be. And when we talk about the one who's in the role of leading the home, particularly if we're talking about the husband and the stereotypical home, we have to make this point. If keeping the bond with her means compromising his bond with God, she's going to cost that man his soul. And frankly, every time she says, "I love you," it's a lie. Either based on insincerity or at least an inaccurate definition of what love is. Because love will not draw a person further from God, but help encourage a person to get closer to God. Prioritizing relationships. First and foremost, Him. Next, her. Jesus put it this way. Matthew 19:6, "They are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. Let no one separate the union that God has bound." That means the bond between man and wife is to be inseparable to the influence of the in-laws, to the influence of the children. None are to come between him and her in their bond. Next to him is to be her. Prioritizing relationships. Next comes them. We think about the words of Ephesians 6:4, "Fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord." Parents have a responsibility to their children. They are duty bound to provide for them, yes, not only the physical needs, but also the guidance that they need in being pointed toward God. Priorities. First Him, then her, then them. Next, whatever else. Those outside the home, yes. The job that helps take care of the home, yes. Matthew 6:33, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you." It is imperative, especially for young men starting out, but when we stop and think about it, it's really for all husbands of all ages, all leaders in the home, to keep in mind that the priority of providing can become so misconstrued and misprioritized that it costs us the relationships that are so valuable. He identifies himself by his job. That's one of the innate characteristics of the way that he looks at his work. From the 16-year-old bag boy you meet and you talk with him for 30 seconds and you find out he's a bag boy at the grocery store, to the 60-year-old engineer that you speak with him for 30 seconds and you've already learned that he's an engineer. Men tend to identify themselves by their work. And here's why this is important. Gentlemen, if we make the mistake of identifying ourselves by our labors more than by our brides or by our responsibilities as fathers, we have done a disservice to them and to Him. First things first, prioritize relationships. Now, we go ahead and move forward. Number 2, family. Family, what do we mean by that? Simply this. We think about the words of, we've heard, "as goes the home." Well, that's indeed the case. Joshua said, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." He did not say, "As for me and my nation." He spoke for his home first and foremost, because as goes the home, so goes the nation. We noted Psalm 127 and 128 last week, and the development over the course of a life that is demonstrated in those 2 consecutive Psalms. From the beginning of the house, except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it, Psalm 127:1. To the arrival of children, they're a heritage of the Lord, Psalm 127:3. To the maturing of the children as olive plants around the table, Psalm 128:3. To the arrival of grandchildren, you'll see your children's children and peace upon Israel, Psalm 128:5. In looking at those Psalms, you'll see your children's children and peace upon Israel. As goes the home, so goes the nation. It starts with the home unit. Let's take this principle and apply it. We've got our catchword, our family, our idiom. As goes the home, we have to manage our house as well. And let's put the emphasis on our, because I can't manage your house. You can't manage mine. We each have a responsibility in our own homes. And as such, we think about the words of Proverbs 24, beginning in verse 30. I went by the field of the slothful, by the vineyard of the man void of understanding, and lo, it was all grown over with thorns. The nettles had covered the face thereof. The stone wall thereof was broken down. The description of a property in disrepair. I looked and considered it well. I beheld and received instruction, yet a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep, so shall thy poverty come as one that traveleth, and thy want as an armed man. A little sleep, a little slumber, neglect. The reason this property was in disrepair, the reason the possessions of the slothful and the man void of understanding were in such poor condition was because of neglect. Now, Proverbs 24 speaks of that in terms of physical property. But how many households are in disrepair, are in shambles because of neglect? Part of it will be because priorities were skewed and there was more focus put on the dollar than on the home. Yes, neglect. When we consider what Solomon had to say, Ecclesiastes 6:7, all the labors of man's hands are for his mouth. It craves it of him. Here's a person who just keeps laboring and laboring and laboring, the workaholic, and it's all for his mouth. There's a selfish motivation there. Things are out of order. When first things first, and then when it comes to family, we have the idea of manage the house well. Well, each home contributes not only to the society wherein it exists in the present time, but all those that will come out from that home are going to contribute to an expansion in the society in the days ahead. As goes the home, so goes the nation. First, family. Final. Final, Scott, I thought you said there were 10 of them. There are, and I know this is only number 3, but just bear with me. Final. Make the call. What do we mean by that? Hear Joshua again. As for me and my house, we will... Wait a minute. Sweetheart, is it okay if I say this? Hear Joshua. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. There is no record, indication, hint, or implication that Joshua asked permission from his wife before he made the declaration on behalf of his house. As the leader of his home, he made a decision. Nor is there any sort of indication, hint, or implication that Joshua sent a text message to his kid's ball coach to make sure that it wasn't going to interfere with practice schedule either. Think about this. We talked about the priorities earlier. First him, then her, then them. When the leader in the home forfeits leadership because of the whims or schedules or preferences of the ones that are to be led, particularly the children, it's not that he's surrendering authority to them. He's surrendering authority to the ball coach. Or he's surrendering authority to the children's peers. And as such, it'll be a wreck. But we think about the idea here. Joshua, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. He made a decision, he stuck to it, and he led in that decision. Make the final call. Bear the burden of being the ultimate decision maker in the home. Now, that is a responsibility that has been given to the head of the home. In a home where there is a husband and a wife, then that responsibility has been given to the husband. He has to be able to make decisions. Genesis 2:24, the description of the candidate eligible for marriage is, a man shall leave father and mother and cleave to his wife. Is he able to make decisions for himself? Is he able to tie his own shoes, wipe his own nose, and pour his own cereal? Or is he so dependent on someone else that he doesn't know left from right? That he can't make decisions? The goal of any parent is not to instill in children a permanent dependence, but to bring them up to have a like-minded independence, to be able to make decisions for themselves. If we're going to lead in the home, we have to be able to make the final call. Take the responsibility of considering the preferences and opinions and perspectives of the others in the home, but make the final call. Anybody afraid of messing up? Doing the wrong thing? Taking the wrong step? Make the final call. It's a responsibility that God has specifically assigned, and therefore a responsibility that must be specifically executed. Let's go ahead and move forward. Number 4, we've talked first things first. Family, as goes the home. Final, make the final call. And then fault. Our catchphrase, the buck stops here. Because sometimes when the call was made, it didn't go well. Or then sometimes he didn't make the call in the first place because he had already forfeited leadership in his home. But guess what? The one that is in the role of leading the home has to accept responsibility instead of trying to blame the wife or the children for the things that went wrong. Let's make a side note right here. There have been far too many occasions where she, in insubordination and abject rebellion, refused to heed his lead or render to him the headship that God has assigned him, but then when anything goes wrong, she wants to blame him. Now, for those that decline to accept the headship that's assigned, for those that fail to lead in the way that they are to lead, it's nonetheless the responsibility of the one whom God has deemed as the head to accept accountability when things don't go right. What do we mean by this? Genesis 3:12, the first time something went south in a home, guess what the husband did? The woman you gave me. He pointed the finger in every direction but himself. And it happens far too often. Not everything is the direct blame of the head of the home, but we have to ask a question. Could my influence have been better? Could I have done a better job of instilling and instructing? Does he constantly come home from work and the house is in shambles? Well, I told them to clean up, I told them to clean up, I told them to clean up. Yes, but did you teach them? Is the house a wreck, or is that teenager's driving reckless? Well, I keep telling him to be careful. I keep telling him to be careful. Yes, but have you taught him? Have you taught him with instructive discipline, with corrective discipline if necessary? There comes a point where we have to be willing to say the buck stops here. Harry Truman, President of the United States, his first term was not an elected one. He picked up after Franklin Delano Roosevelt's death. And he was the president that had to make the decision pertaining to whether or not atomic bombs would be dropped, ultimately bringing an end to World War II. He was the president who on his desk had the sign that said, "The buck stops here." Now, yay or nay on the benefits of Truman's presidency and the wisdom of all of his decisions, by and large, he took accountability not only for his actions, but for all of those under his purview. The buck stops here. The head of every home needs to have that stenciled on his heart. Now, sometimes it's not a matter of ultimate fault, but we have to be willing to ask the question, could I have had a better influence? Should I start having a better influence? How can I improve the influence? The buck stops here. First, family, final, fault, and then failure. Number 5, failure if at first you don't succeed, because failure will happen. In fact, the principle for us to take home with this one is this: be willing to fail. Fear of failure has prevented so much progress in the lives of individuals, in the lives of congregations. Fear of failure is perhaps the most crippling aspect in evangelism. Fear of failure can be the most crippling aspect in the home. Ladies, the gentleman might drag me out back and beat me later, but I'm going to tell you a secret. We're scared. We carry with us a constant fear. By and large, when we look in the mirror, we see a teenager who's barely figured out how to live. And we're always afraid that that teenager is about to jump back in our brain and take control of the wheel and do something stupid. We're scared. We're scared that we're going to fail at providing. We're scared that we're going to fail at making a decision. And we are afraid that when we make a decision and something doesn't go quite right, we're going to be disdained in your sight. We're scared. You need to know that. Because every time a decision comes down the road or up the pipe, where he has to make a judgment and he's willing to accept the God-given responsibility laid upon his shoulders, and he, with all of his wisdom and every fiber of his being, endeavors to make the best decision that he can with limited information, he needs your support. Is it a matter of sin? We've got a different story here. Is it a matter of what's most prudent? Is it a judgment call that God has, the husband is the head of the wife, Ephesians 5:25, rendered to him in his role? He needs your support. Because every time he makes one of those decisions and it goes south, if he gets any semblance of an "I told you so," it's going to make the next decision harder. And the one after that. And the one after that. And now if what you wanted was a weak, spineless puddle for a husband, you just second guess those decisions that don't go right, and you'll end up with one. If what you want is someone that's able to admit mistakes and move forward, someone that will recognize fault and will, "Hey, I'm sorry, that was my fault." When we're willing to admit fault, it's a whole lot easier to say "I'm sorry." But when we know that mistakes, shortcomings, and unknowns are not going to be weaponized, it's a whole lot easier to move forward and make decisions. Failure. Yes, it's a reality. Proverbs 24:16, "A just man falleth 7 times and riseth up again." You can't keep a good man down. Failures will happen. To those that would lead the home, you're going to mess up. You are going to have regrets. You're going to have decisions that in retrospect and hindsight, you're thinking, "How did I miss that?" It's amazing what can blind our eyes right there in a moment of decision. Learn, move forward, grow. Be willing to fail so that you can learn truly how to succeed. First, family. Final, fault, failure. And having discussed failure, let's go ahead and get into fear. That's number 6. Fear, to this we'll attach a statement that we'll borrow from a shoe company. Just do it. Joshua chapter 1. Joshua had been encouraged by God Himself. "Be strong and of good courage. I will never leave thee nor forsake thee." Now this is the Joshua who would take this encouragement that would not only come from God, but over the course of Joshua chapter 1, 4 times. 4 times he is told, "Be strong and of good courage." 3 come from God. "My precepts are with you, my promises before you, my presence is with you." But then, at the end of the chapter, it's the people of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, those 3 tribes that were going to be marching ahead, the front lines of the battle. When Joshua goes to them and says, remember your promise, they tell Joshua, you be strong and of good courage. We're with you. Not only was Joshua to be strong of good courage because God's precepts were with him, God's presence was with him, and God's promise was before him, but God's people were behind him. No wonder when we get to Joshua chapter 7 and 8, and Joshua messed up. Joshua faced a failure. Instead of going to God, because had he gone to God, let there be no doubt the event of Ai would not have had to happen with the loss of 36 lives of the 3,000 that were sent. But no, there was someone in the camp that had taken of the accursed thing, that which was belonging to God from Jericho that he wasn't to take. He had essentially stolen God's trash because God had accounted this as belonging to him and it was to be destroyed. Achan steals from God's trash, and as a result, 36 die in the next battle. Joshua falls on his face. He's praying to God. What are the nations going to say? Are the people going to follow? And God says, Joshua, get up. The same God that has said, I'll never leave you nor forsake you, was right there with Joshua when Joshua faced a failure. Joshua was able to get up and move forward, using God's guidance to take not only Ai but Bethel in the next battle, Joshua chapter 8. So we turn our attention back to Joshua 1 and we hear these words, be strong and of good courage. It's not a promise that you'll never fail. Be strong and of good courage. I will not leave thee nor forsake thee. It's not a promise that nothing's ever going to go wrong. It's a promise that when you face your fears, you don't have to do it alone. By the way, that same promise echoes today. Hebrews 13, 4 and 5, marriage is honorable in all, the bed undefiled, but whoremongers and adulterers God will judge. Let your conversation be without covetousness, and be content with such things as you have. For he hath said, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. The Hebrews writer addresses the purity of marriage, a warning against covetousness, and stresses a promise that God has made that still applies to the church today. God has said, I'll never leave thee nor forsake thee. Fear. Face it. Be willing to face fear. Courage is not absence of fear. Courage is actually being willing to act in the face of fear, despite its presence. 10 musts for leading a godly home. Fear will be a reality. And if we neglect to face it, then the stone wall will be broken down and the home will fall apart. First, family. Final, fault, failure, fear. Formidable. Formidable. Joshua was told, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. You be strong and of good courage, and let there be no doubt. Joshua was a strong one. This was a military man. Every aspect of Joshua's life is connected to his military prowess and role and his service. That being said, Joshua was one that didn't have to flex. By the way, true strength doesn't have to flex. Those with the ability don't have to put their ability on the billboard so all can know about it. Let's put this in simple terms. Joshua was able to be confident without being arrogant. And a leader in the home needs that. In facing fear, there has to be a confidence, but not a blind arrogance. And there's a stark contrast there. Remember, it was God that told Joshua, I'll never leave thee nor forsake thee. We turn our attention to Proverbs for just a moment. We think about the words of Proverbs 3 beginning in verse 5. Trust in the Lord with all thy heart. Lean not to thine own understanding. Trust in God. In all thy ways acknowledge Him. He shall direct thy paths. Trust in God. Be not wise in thine own eyes. Fear the Lord and depart from evil. Trust in God. There's a call for leadership right there. Trust in God. It's not about your own eyes or your own ways or your own understanding. Follow Him. Now compare that with Proverbs 27, 1 and 2. Proverbs 27:1, boast not thyself of tomorrow, for thou knowest not what a day may bring forth. Here's one that's bragging about tomorrow before today's over. Here's one that assumes next year's success before he's finished this year's training course. Here's one that thinks he has it all figured out. He's going to win the game before he's even laced up his cleats. Boast not thyself of tomorrow, thou knowest not what a day may bring forth. There's a place for confidence. There's no place for arrogance. There's a place for a willingness to venture and try. But there's no place for taking for granted simply based on our own merit. By the way, Proverbs 27:1 warns of that boastfulness toward the future. Verse 2 looks toward the past. Let another man praise thee, not thine own mouth. A stranger and not thine own lips. This is confidence about what I did yesterday, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows how well it went. I'm going to tell about my successes. It's sad how many people think they have to give their resume and prove themselves at virtually every conversation. And brethren, there are too many preachers that do it. Can you kick us in the shin when we act that way? Please, or duct tape our mouths or something. There are too many that think they have to give a resume instead of being real people interacting with others. I'm here to tell you, I can't help but pity some wives after having spent just a few minutes with their husbands, because if they're that big of braggarts out in public, how must they behave in the home? And how much must life have to revolve around them under their own roofs? Proverbs 27 is a warning against that braggadocio. Proverbs 10, there's a place for confidence. He that walketh uprightly walketh surely. When we walk uprightly, we can walk in certainty, confidence. Or we think about Proverbs 14:26, in the fear of the Lord is strong confidence. There's a strong confidence, a trust in Him, yes. But again, the trust is in Him, not self. We continue to move forward. We discussed the idea of first, put first things first. Family, as goes the home. Final, make the call. Fault, the buck stops here. Failure, well, if at first you don't succeed. Fear, just do it. Formidable, we don't have to flex. Fight. Joshua said, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. As Joshua said these words, he's speaking to the children of Israel, and he will tell them about some of the sins that they're fighting, particularly their idolatry. And Joshua tells them God's not going to tolerate that behavior. Their behaviors God never has tolerated and never will. Their behaviors that were the downfall of various individuals in Scripture that are still going to be the downfall of those today that try to pursue after that manner of conduct. One of those behaviors that tends to be most prominent and most threatening to the home can be carnality. And if there's a fight that needs to be fought, especially in the world wherein we dwell today, it's a fight against carnality. Brethren, we live in a society where we are rampantly seeing an increase in the number of sex scandals. The rampant trafficking and abuse and assault of entire groups of people by those who feel like they held positions of power and prestige. We live in a society that is so fueled by desire and pleasure that it's coming to define us. And that which defines a culture can defile the church in that culture if we're not careful. As such, it's important to keep in mind that, gentlemen, you may never have made a mistake in this area. Ladies, you may never have either. But we would be foolish to take for granted that we are impervious, not susceptible. Think about this. Are you as strong as Samson? Can you carry a city gate for miles? Are you as devoted as David? penning psalms that run the gamut of emotions, all poured out in an expression to God. Are you as wise as Solomon? Yet, they all three have something in common. Ultimately, the darkest days of their lives, the greatest obstacles they faced, and their downfall came because of their inability to resist carnality. With Samson, it was his relationship with promiscuous women. With David, it was his adulterous relationship with Bathsheba. With Solomon, it was 700 wives and 300 concubines. And if it was a threat to some of the strongest, most devoted, and wisest individuals in Scripture, we'd be remiss to pretend like it can't be a threat today. So there has to be a decision to fight. And in making that fight, that means we're going to fight to protect our eyes. We're going to fight to protect our hands and where they go. We're going to fight to protect our relationships and with whom we allow ourselves to be seen interacting. We're going to fight to protect our marriages because there are so many times an accusation can be hurled when nothing has happened, but once an accusation is hurled, you can't unring a bell. We're going to fight against carnality in every aspect that's connected to it. Number 9, fact. Briefly, the fact is, act like what you are. And if you're the leader in a home, husband, father, act like a man. That's what you are. Proverbs 1:12 through 14. Joshua would tell those from Gad, Issachar, and Reuben that they were to come and fight. Leave your children at home. You know what's interesting? Joshua didn't have to say, how do you identify? I know you look like a man, but do you identify as a woman? You'll need to stay home. By the way, when you get to Joshua chapters 4 and 5 and they're circumcising the nation again, they didn't go around with a sign-up sheet for who identified in that regard either. Yet here we are in a nation where, depending on where you look, there are some 60 or more different gender identities. Let's keep something in mind. God made man, God made woman. Masculinity isn't toxic. What do we mean by that? Well, there are those that are trying to convince us that masculinity is a Western culture idea, and masculinity isn't toxic. Not when we're talking about godly masculinity. Not when we're talking about a proper leadership, a proper chivalry, a proper mindset. There is no shame in acting like a man who serves the Lord. Nor is there any shame in a woman acting like a woman who serves the Lord. Godly masculinity is not toxic, and toxicity is not godly masculinity. There are those that think manliness means bravado, braggadocio, being obnoxious. No, that's just being a jerk. And by the way, there are all sorts of folks that can be jerks, both on the male and female side of the gender aisle. The braggadocio and the obnoxious behavior is not the defining characteristic of what makes a man, nor is it the defining characteristic of what makes her a woman. Don't be ashamed to be what God made you to be, told you to be, and wants you to be. First things first, family, as goes the home. Final, make the call. Fault, accept the responsibility. The buck stops here. Failure, yes, be willing to face it because it's going to happen. And when it does, if at first you don't succeed, fear, just do it. Formidable, don't flex. Fight, take a stand. Fact, act like a man. Finally, finish. Joshua left a legacy. He said, as for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. As goes the home, so goes the nation. Consider Joshua 24:31. Because the statement recorded is that the children of Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders that overlived Joshua. As for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord, and it impacted the entirety of the nation. Our idiom, live the legacy you want to leave. Our explanation, live well to die well. We can add to this 2 Timothy 4, 7 and 8, wherein the Apostle Paul said, I've fought a good fight, I've finished my course, I've kept the faith, and henceforth is laid up for me a crown of righteousness. Now let's take this straight down to the home. There are many who have solid, good names from the past that we hear their names and we think gospel preacher or servant, and rightly so. But here's a question. When the day comes that I, like Paul, was looking to happen, we'll leave this life. When the day comes that I or my spouse becomes widowed, if I'm the one that goes first, will I have lived in such a way that my spouse will miss me or that my spouse will be relieved? There have been far too many occasions when those that were perceived as good Christian people left their homes with a sense of relief once they left because of the way they acted behind the privacy of closed doors. What a shame to think that there have been occasions where as the preacher spoke at the funeral, the widow was thinking, he didn't know the man I knew. Live the legacy you want to leave. Live the legacy that will cause you to be missed. That will cause you to be emulated in a good way. Live the legacy that will allow you to say like Paul, follow me as I followed Christ. As for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. Those were Joshua's words. Can we emulate them and repeat them? The ideas we've considered are first. But first things first, prioritize relationships. Family, as goes the home. Final, make the call. Fault, the buck stops here. Failure, it happens. If at first you don't succeed. Fear, just do it. Formidable, you don't have to flex. Fight, take a stand. Fact, act like what you are. And finally, finish, live your legacy. This evening, this afternoon, maybe it's the case that in considering the legacy you've been leaving, it's not one that will lead anyone in your family to the Lord. And it's not one that's leading you to the Lord either, and it's time to make things right. Perhaps it's the case that you need to repent because your relationship with God has been one that's been outward but not inward. One that's been a facade but not true faithfulness. Maybe it's the case you've never obeyed the gospel and you're ready to be baptized in the name of Jesus Christ for the remission of sins. We will never be able to light the light in our homes unless we walk in the light with our Lord. As such, if you're ready to start doing that by becoming a child of God or as a child of God by coming home, why not take the opportunity while we stand together?